Hello and welcome to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about Ed Hart, we're going to talk about InteliTouch, we're going to talk about Homestar, and we're going to follow up on a couple things about Homestead products. So, first of all, I want to have a huge shout out and thank you at the top of this video. First of all, to Ed Hart, because we couldn't do a video about Ed Hart if Ed Hart did not exist. Second of all, to Vintage Fans and More, and to I Heart fans. When I did the Homestead products video, we talked about how Ed Hart designed InteliTouch, Homestar for Homestead, and then back to Casablanca for Comfort Touch. I thought that was interesting. I thought there was an interesting story there. People from Vintage Fans and More and I Heart fans encouraged me. Yes, there's an interesting story there. Here are the tools you need to follow up on it. So I definitely want to shout them out. Please go and support those channels. Okay, so let's get into our topic. Again, if you saw the Homestead products video, and I think you should probably before this video, you should make sure you have seen Homestead products and Burton. We talked about, again, Ed Hart worked for Casablanca, patented InteliTouch, worked for Homestead, patented Homestar, went back to Casablanca. Let's get into it. So, as often with these sort of topics, we have to actually go back in time, well before InteliTouch or Homestar. We're going to go all the way back to 1911. In 1911, Estell C. Raney, an electrical engineer from Ohio, developed and patented an automatic reclosing circuit breaker. Most of you hopefully know what a circuit breaker is. Normally, when they open, they stay open until you reset it and you have to close it. He patented a circuit breaker that would close on its own. In other words, it would turn back on after the fault, the short or the overload, had corrected itself. That was 1911. In 1913, he formed the Automatic Reclosing Circuit Breaker Company, which is a mouthful, and it was shorted to the A.R.C.B. Co. because the whole name would not fit on the uniforms of the company's baseball team. In 1936, the name was changed again to Ranco for Raney's Controls. In 1961, Teccor Electronics is incorporated in Dallas, Texas. They are a semiconductor manufacturer. They make transistors and chips and, semiconductors, small electronics. In 1966, an engineering major named Ed Hart comes to work for Ranco. In 1979, Ed Hart, an engineer and later VP at Ranco, orchestrates the purchase of Teccor. So Ranco makes circuit breakers and controls and things like that. Ranco makes semiconductors and transistors, which are used in controls and things like that. Ranco moves him to Dallas to run Teccor. Teccor makes, among other things, ceiling fan controls. Remember, solid-state ceiling fan controls use triacs or SCRs, which are semiconductors. Teccor is a supplier to Casablanca. So in this process, Ed Hart meets Burton. If you don't know who Burton is, or you don't know much about him, go back earlier in the series. I did a whole video on Burton. It is fascinating. All things having to do with Burton are fascinating. That's definitely required watching or listening. So that's 79. 1980. Ed Hart patents the first remote wall control for ceiling fans using existing wiring called the remote load sensor. So, when we talk about remote controls, so first of all, there are hardwired wall controls that require a separate wire for the fan and light. Then there are infrared or radio frequency remote controls that are wireless and use a battery. And then we have controls like the InteliTouch and the Homestar, which we'll talk more about later, that use the existing wiring in the wall but send signals through the wall so you can control the fan and light separately even if you don't have separate fan and light wires. And he patented the first control of that type, which again was called the remote load selector. The patent was assigned to Teccor Electronics and later Ranco. It was designed for one of their clients, the Casablanca Fan Company, and it specifically fit in Casablanca canopies. And by the way, I've got some pictures of that. They're going to be in the slideshows, and they're going to be uploaded to Dan Spiffy Newman Ceiling Fans. I won't tell you exactly where. You got to hunt for them. It's an Easter egg, but the pictures are there. So Casablanca actually passes. This was designed for Casablanca, designed to fit their fans, but Casablanca passes on it, but they become interested in Ed. Skip forward to 1982. Burton sells the Casablanca Fan Company to Farmhouse Foods. And again, I think that's amusing that Farmhouse Foods is now owner of a fan company, but we talked about that in the Burton video, so, go back to that video. I'm not going to get into it here. And Burton offers Ed a job as VP of Casablanca, with the promise that when Burton steps away completely, Ed will take over as chairman of Casablanca. Also in 1982, Burton and Ed are invited to General Electric's Fort Wayne motor plant to see a new fan and motor system they had designed. It used a DC motor with one side of the AC line for the fan and the other side for the lights. Early prototypes had a manual reverse switch on the fan because they did not know how to reverse the fan from the control. This control system might sound similar to you. We'll talk about it a little more. But again, this was the first use of a DC motor in the ceiling fan renaissance, designed for AC current, as opposed to back when AC and DC wars were happening and we were making DC fans for DC current, in the 30s and before. So, GE pitches this new design that they have to Casablanca, to Burton and Ed. GE offered Casablanca a contract to be the first fan company to use this new technology, but it would be exclusive for Casablanca and not for GE. In other words, Casablanca would have to buy it from GE. They couldn't use anybody else as their supplier, but GE could sell it to anybody they wanted to. It would not be exclusive to Casablanca. Casablanca would have to be exclusive to GE, but they would have a leg up. They would be in it first. They would be, they wouldn't offer it to anybody else right away. Ed, Burton says to Ed, "What do you think?" Ed told Burton not to give them an answer. And over the following weekend, Ed Hart came up with InteliTouch. His parameters: could not use radio frequency due to FCC regulations at the time. They were very limited at what radio frequencies you could use in the early 80s. Could not use infrared, which is what a lot of television remotes used at the time, because the fan blades and lights would provide a lot of interference. It would be very buggy. He did not think people would want to hunt for a control, so therefore it had to be wall-mounted. And it needed to be silent, as opposed to like a triac-based solid-state speed control, which we know can be noisy on some fan motors. As an aside, I want to just briefly mention what a solid-state control actually means, and maybe I'll rant about this at another time. Solid-state means there are no mechanical parts. So technically, any remote control other than the relays is solid-state. Technically, InteliTouch other than the relays is solid-state. Solid-state doesn't just mean an infinitely variable triac-type speed control. It means any control where the moving parts are not mechanical. It's all done with electronics, okay? It's, choke control, not solid state. Capacitor-based control with the, different, you have to manually slide different sets of contacts on a switch, not solid state. But anything that uses electronics, whether it's 3-speed, whether it's infinitely variable, if it doesn't use manual contacts, it is solid state. But in the fan industry, we typically, when we say a solid state control, we mean a triac-based infinitely variable control. So that's just a tangent I wanted to go off on. But in this case, we do mean a triac-based solid-state speed control. He did not want to do an infinitely variable control that would be noisy. Now, it just so happened that at that time, Texas Instruments had introduced the low-cost TMS 1000 microprocessor, which was perfect for designing a new fan control. Casablanca hired George Goode and Associates of Dallas, a firm Ed Hart had used when he worked with Ranco and Teccor, to code the microprocessor. So they bought the TMS 1000s from Texas Instruments, and they hired this other firm to do the coding. And they coded it just for the 6 speeds and the light dimmer and everything like that. And then they found out that they were done. And then they found out that there was a lot of memory left in the microprocessor. So, as an afterthought, Ed Hart added the security timer, the light binder, the safe exit, the demo mode. All the other special features that InteliTouch had were actually added as an afterthought, just because there was leftover memory in the chip. So I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, so here's another thing I think is pretty cool. If you've ever taken apart an InteliTouch fan or worked on an InteliTouch fan, there is a red resistive band adhered to the motor, and it's known as the BFR. It controls the amount of power to the motor by resistively reducing the AC voltage to the motor. It's essentially a resistor-based control, not unlike what Fasco's used for their 3-speed fans. It's just big resistors. And So it also serves another purpose, which I didn't know, and this answers one of my questions, because I was like, well, why didn't they just use capacitors? But it also provides a fixed resistive load to the wall control SCRs to stabilize the control signal regardless of the fan speed or light levels. Just keep in mind, otherwise, because again, the wall control is serving two purposes. It's providing power to the fan, and it's also sending the control signals for the computer. And if the fan is at one speed versus another, or the light is at one light level versus another, the amount of power that's going to the fan is changing. And so that can also change those signals and possibly throw it off, so to speak. So the resistive load helps keep that constant. It essentially acts as a ballast for the speed control. So that's why they didn't use capacitors. That's why they use resistors. And they use that resistor strip that adheres to the motor. So when this technology was introduced to the team at Casablanca, one of the engineers said, that's just a big fucking resistor. And so that's how they referred to it. And that's why it is called the BFR. And so all while they were designing and building them, that was called the BFR strip, or just simply called the big fucking resistor. It had no other name. And then they started writing the service manual and realized that they couldn't put big fucking resistor in the service manual, and they needed a G-rated name. So someone, I don't know who, came up with the name Bi-Directional Flow Regulator, which is what the service manual calls it, which is horseshit, which is nonsense. It means nothing in electronic terms, but they needed something that had the initials BFR that did not have a curse word in it. So that's where Bi-Directional Flow Regulator came from. I believe we're now calling that a backronym. When you have an acronym that is, you have the letters first, and then you got to come up with the words for the letters. Wu-Tang Clan is known for doing this with their names, with RZA and Jizza and stuff like that. They all have backronyms. So, in case you were ever wondering if there is a parallel between Casablanca and Ed Hart and the Wu-Tang Clan, there you have it. Casablanca may also be for the children. So, the BFRs were custom made by an aerospace company called Electro-Flex Heat. Ed discovered them when he was reading Aviation Week and Space Technology magazines. He was literally reading through an aviation magazine and saw this company and said, oh, they'd be great to build our big fucking resistors. And that's how it came to be. Also, a designer named Ken Tarlow gets a lot of credit for putting InteliTouch into production. IT switches and boards were made in-house at Casablanca in the City of Industry, California. They did not have other factories assembling and putting together InteliTouch. It was all made in-house, other than, again, we talked about the chips coming from Texas Instruments and being coated, the BFRs coming from the aerospace company, etc. But they bought the parts, they brought them in, they built it in-house. Ed Hart designed the W11 switch himself at his kitchen table, both the cosmetic design of it and the schematics and the circuitry of it. In the future, when it switched to the W32, that was designed by Casablanca designer Richard Holbrook, who has quite a number of famous Casablanca designs under his belt. In the City of Industry, California, at the Casablanca plant, they had a burn-in room where they would operate the fan control boards for several days at high temperatures to find early failures. At one point, the burn-in room caught fire and the fire department had to be called to put it out. After that, Burton insisted on using small fireproof cabinets. Anyone not involved in designing and building InteliTouch was kept in the dark. They even didn't tell the sales team. So the sales team had no idea they were going to be pitching a new product after it was introduced. So that's 1982. Now we're at 1983. And they're in the final stages. Ed Hart goes to a local hardware store and buys every type of light bulb they sell to test with IT. The bulbs that worked best with the dimmers and IT were GE appliance bulbs. They were the clear winner. And this is how A15 bulbs came to be the standard ceiling fan bulbs. Even if you go to Menards or Walmart or Home Depot today and you buy ceiling fan bulbs, they are clear, small A-type A15. These days usually LED filament, but they look like a small appliance bulb. And that is due to Ed Hart going to the hardware store and just happening to buy GE appliance bulbs that worked really well with InteliTouch, as compared to all the other bulbs that that hardware store offered. That is the beginning of 1983. Also at the beginning of 1983, there was a Wall Street Journal story about a Holiday Inn setting up a satellite-based seminar system broadcasting closed-circuit television signals to its hotels around the U.S. That's another mouthful. Ed pitched it to Burton, and Burton was so excited that by the end of the day, he already had a producer lined up to produce this television broadcast. Ed wrote the script and directed the camera work. Casa's PR guy found the Rockwell office nearby where a full-sized space shuttle mock-up was located along with the Apollo capsule. This broadcast went live in August. It was the first time a new product was launched on a closed-circuit TV broadcast. The first person to do it was Burton, Ed Hart. Second person to ever do it was Steve Jobs. The video of the broadcast can be seen on YouTube. I think I have some version or clips from it on my YouTube channel. I believe the whole thing is on Vintage Fans and More. Either way, it's available on YouTube, so you can watch that broadcast. That was InteliTouch being introduced live on television to Casablanca dealers nationwide, as well as the Casablanca sales team. Nobody knew this was coming. This was a surprise to everyone. This was designed to blow everybody's mind, and oh my God. And it kind of did. It really did put Casablanca back in the game in a big way at a time when, you know, other ceiling fan companies in the market was really kind of competitive. So that's August of 1983 when that broadcast goes live. In 1984, Farmhouse Foods sends Max Van Dordrecht, who's Casablanca's president, we talked about him in the Burton video, Ed Hart, and other upper management to manage other struggling companies they'd recently purchased. So Farmhouse Foods had purchased a bunch of companies to diversify. One of those companies was Casablanca. Casablanca was doing well in large part due to InteliTouch. Some of those other companies were struggling, so Farmhouse Foods says, okay, Casablanca is doing well. These other companies are not. We're going to send some of the top people from Casablanca to these other companies to fix them up. And so Max Van Dordrecht gets sent, Ed Hart gets sent, and other people whose names I don't know get sent to these other companies. And they spend a year at these other companies to try to help them. And it was miserable for them. I don't know if it was productive for the companies, but the people who were doing it, Ed and Max, etc., hated it. In 1985, Farmhouse Foods reinstates Burton as chairman. And again, we talk about how Burton leaving, coming back, never really leaving, etc. We talk about all of that in the Burton video. So again, go and watch that video if you haven't already. So in 1985, Ed leaves. Because remember, Burton made him a promise that when he left for good, Ed would take over as chairman of Casablanca. Well, that was 1982. It's now 1985, and Burton's being fully reinstated, so it's not looking good for Ed. So he leaves. I don't know whose decision that was. I don't know if it was Ed's decision, Burton's decision, Farmhouse Foods' decision. I get the impression that Ed chose to leave, but that's above my pay grade. I don't know the details there. So Ed goes into the consulting business, and he consults for other companies, and one of the companies that hires him is Homestead. Homestead had taken GE's offer. Remember, we're going to go back to 1982. GE had this new DC motor technology that was designed to be this innovative new fan control and this innovative new hyper-efficient motor. They pitched it to Casablanca. Casablanca said no thanks, and Ed came up with InteliTouch in a weekend. Homestead, on the other hand, took the offer, and that became, of course, the Superfan, which a lot of us know. It was really cool. It was a first of its kind, but it was also very problematic. And so Homestead took GE's offer, and they were having problems. And so they asked Ed Hart to consult and design something different than the Superfan and different than InteliTouch that would work for them. So in 1986, Ed Hart patents Homestar. And one of the things that I was wondering is, okay, Homestar seems very similar to InteliTouch, so how is it that they're not infringing on patents or trademarks or copyrights or anything to that effect? And the difference is Homestar uses variable time signaling instead of fixed time signaling on the AC line. InteliTouch uses fixed time signaling. So unlike Casablanca, who made all their controls and parts and things in City of Industry, California, and used Emerson motors, Homestead has the controls and motors built in Taichung, Taiwan. In 1987, Burton asks Ed Hart to return to Casablanca, and he returns to Casablanca. In 1989, Ed Hart patents ComfortTouch for Casablanca, which is made possible by new FCC rules. Ed made a crude drawing, and Richard Holbrook, we talked about him before, he designed the W32, he designed a bunch of other Casablanca fans. Richard Holbrook designed the actual ComfortTouch control. Casablanca found a factory to build it in Hong Kong. Also uploaded in the slideshows into Dan Spiffy Newman ceiling fans are pictures of the prototype Comfort Touch control next to the real thing. So look for that picture. That was 1989. Also in 1989, Burton asked Ed Hart to design a voice-controlled fan. Unfortunately, nothing ever happened to that, and Burton did not live to see Alexa, which is too bad because that's what he would have wanted. So that's 1989. Either the end of 1989 or 1990, there is friction between Burton and Ed Hart, results in Ed leaving for a second time. I believe that time it was not Ed's decision. But I don't know for sure. Also, in 1989 or 1990, Homestead products is purchased by Forecast Lighting, which is something that I didn't know. I thought they were, family owned until Casablanca bought them out. That turns out that's not true. It turns out they were bought by Forecast Lighting, which is a lighting company. In 1990, and it goes into 1991, Casablanca Fan Company files for bankruptcy. GE Capital, one of their debtors, buys Casablanca. GE Capital asks Ed Hart to return for a third time back to Casablanca. And he comes back for, again, about a year to one final tenure under GE. But by 1982, Ed Hart has moved on from the ceiling fan industry into the aerospace industry. And I think there's been some clues in the video that he was always interested in aerospace. And in 1993, GE Capital, who had just recently bought Casablanca out of bankruptcy, buys Homestead products from Forecast Lighting. And now one of the things I wanted to follow up on from the last videos, because again, there was a note in Wikipedia that claimed there was a lawsuit with Homestead, and I've heard rumors from other people in the fan industry that Homestead went bankrupt or was about to go bankrupt, and I've confirmed, once again, Homestead was never involved in any bankruptcies or lawsuits, and I can't find any evidence that Forecast Lighting, who owned them for a couple of years, was either. Forecast Lighting was, for all intents and purposes that we can tell, a very successful company. So, wow. A lot of stuff I learned there. A lot of stuff I didn't know. A lot of really cool and interesting stories that I am proud and privileged to document as a part of ceiling fan history. That is why I love this video series and this podcast series. I learned things that I didn't even know were out there to be learned. And I'm so grateful again to Ed Hart, Burton, I guess I should include, and of course, Vintage Fans and More and iHeart fans for contributing to this video. So, if you enjoyed this video, if you, like me, learned a lot and you don't want to miss out on any more of these topics, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Please make sure you subscribe in podcast form, wherever podcasts are sold. We are able to do great things like that because in addition to help from all those great resources that I just mentioned, we also have a sponsor, and that sponsor is FanStick, and I encourage you to continue to support us by buying FanStick. Thanks for watching.